and welcome back to my channel, where I'm going to quickly explain the optional class features provided by Tasha's Cauldron of Everything for the Cleric class. If you did not watch the video where I explain what the optional class features are, I highly recommend watching that before you view this video, as it will cover the basics of what types of optional features there are, and go over some of the terms that I will use in this video. To help you out, I have provided a link to that video in the description below. The Cleric gains two features that are considered enhancement features, one that I would consider to be a retraining feature, and one that is classified as a replacement feature. Essentially, this means that two of the new features are adjusting existing features, while the third offers you the means to adjust your cantrips, and the last offers a different feature that replaces the Divine Strike or Potent spellcasting features. The first enhancement feature is called Additional Clerical Spells, which gives you access to spells the Cleric did not have the means to cast prior to the release of Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. There are a total of 8 new spells that you are going to gain, and they range from levels 3 through to levels 9, but they skip level 7. This list is in complement to the existing clerical spells already available to the class, so when the Cleric levels up, they can choose a spell in this list versus that of the standard list, providing a wider overall selection of available spells. This feature is made available right away at level 1, and it will most likely be permitted by your Dungeon Master, as it is nothing more than an enhancement to the existing spellcasting capabilities for the Cleric. The next enhancement feature is gained at level 2, and it is called Harness Divine Power. And this particular feature works alongside the Channel Divinity feature and gives you another option, allowing you to call on your Divine Power and regain an expended spell slot. The maximum level of the spell slot is based on the following formula. It is half of your proficiency bonus, rounding up. So at level 2, you have a +2 proficiency bonus. Divide that by 2 is equal to 1, which means that at level 2, you can regain a level 1 spell slot. We can figure this out a little bit easier as well by looking at the Cleric's leveling table, specifically at the proficiency column. Essentially, when you gain a proficiency point, divide that value by 2 and then round up by 1 if you end up with a half value. So in relation to this level 5 proficiency gain here, we get a +1 to our proficiency bonus, now giving us a total of 3 proficiency points. Divide that by 2 is 1.5, rounding up equals 2, which means that at 5th level, you will be able to regain a 2nd level spell slot. Of all of the spell slots that you can recover, the maximum level your character is ever going to be able to regain is going to be a level 3 spell slot, starting at level 13. And that is because the maximum proficiency bonus your character is going to gain is +6 without any magical modifications. Therefore, 6 divided by 2 equals 3. Additionally, you have a limited number of uses that also align with your Channel Divinity uses, which means that you have one use until you get to level 6, where you will now have the ability to use 2 uses, and then when you get to level 18, you will be able to have 3 uses. As this works alongside your Channel Divinity feature, this means that the uses are shared between both of these features, such that if you choose to turn the undead, then you won't be able to regain a spell slot, unless you are level 6 or higher and happen to have a couple of uses still available. This also means the opposite. If you have chosen to regain a spell slot, you won't be able to make use of your Turn Undead effect with the same kinds of restrictions, unless you are level 6 or higher and have a couple of extra uses sitting around. There is, however, a rest requirement in order for you to be able to regain the use of these features. And it is for you to be able to take a long rest specific to the Harness Divine Power. So if you complete a short rest to regain a Channel Divinity point for your normal Channel Divinity features, you will still be unable to use the Regain Spells option until you have actually completed a long rest. This also means that we need to find a way to cross-track these uses somehow within Fantasy Grounds, and unfortunately the idea that I've come up with is going to require a bit of work on the player side to ensure accuracy. And you'll see what I mean by that here in a moment. So the first thing that we're going to want to do is drop our Harness Divine Power into our Actions tab, and it will create an empty group. But unlike previous utilizations where I've set it up underneath the class grouping, I'm actually going to create a different group this time called Channel Divinity. And I'm going to set that up there. I'm also going to move this particular feature into there, and you'll see why in a moment. Right now, Channel Divinity is set up to be 3 uses for a long rest for this level 20 Cleric that I'm using as the example. I'm going to move this to Channel Divinity as well. Divinity. And now what we've got is essentially a group set aside specifically for our Channel Divinity feature, which means that we can now control this group in its entirety simply through modifying our power group features. And I opened that by clicking on this magnifying glass. Now, the one option that we do have is that you could leave this simply as it is now, except set up the number of utilizations that you have to be equal to that of your Channel Divinity Turn on Dead feature. The problem is, this will be a short rest feature, this will be a long rest feature. And when you use each of these features, you're going to have to remember to check both of these each time you use one or the other. And here's the catch. When you execute the short rest, or your DM executes the short rest, only Channel Divinity will return, but Harness Divine Power won't for each of the uses that you have. So, for example, if I execute a short rest now, we'll see that Channel Divinity returns. So this very, very quickly can become very, very confusing. Because essentially, you do have 3 utilizations of Channel Divinity available. You do not, however, have 3 utilizations of Harness Divine Power. Technically, you only have 2 remaining for that particular day. However, there's also an alternative here, and it's not necessarily any better than this option, but it might work better for you as a player, so I'm going to give you this option. You'll notice that in our power group here, we have the ability to set up a uses configuration here. If we set that to 3 and set this to rest, what happens is it overrides our preparation features here. So if you look at this particular list now, you don't see the option to choose the rest. You just see the utilizations per day. And in fact, you can clear those out because it's now being controlled by this particular grouping. Now what happens when you actually go through and use this is that, let's say we make use of our Harness Divine Power. Boop. You notice that this checkmark has now actually also been flagged, and you can't even select it as an option, in case you didn't hear my mouse bashing there. Now let's say that I use a Channel Divinity feature. As you can see, in both cases we now have a checkmark in use. And if I use another, boom, the whole grouping goes away. This is a way that you can link all of these kinds of features that are tied off of the exact same usage into one group. The trick is going to be remembering which one you've used. Now, if I go ahead and execute a short rest, you will see that everything comes back. This kind of isn't necessarily what we want, because technically we don't want Harness Divine Power to return. But this is a limitation of utilizing this grouping in this particular way. Even though your uses are linked, even when you execute a short rest, everything comes back. So you as the player will have to remember that if you have already gone through all of your uses and you have not yet completed a long rest, you won't be able to make use of your Harness Divine Power. And that is something that you will have to remember. Now, the other thing that you can do, though, is let's say you've used 1 Channel Divinity feature and then 2 Divine Power uses. Well, when you execute a short rest, you still technically have 1 use left. But now you have essentially burned through the last use you have for that particular day, and you only have 2 uses of Channel Divinity left. So this is why I say it's going to take a little bit of work on you, the player, to coordinate and remember what you've done and what you've used, and keep in mind that might stretch over a couple of weeks depending on how frequently you've played. But those are the options that are available to us when it comes to setting this up. And that completes that setup. The next feature that you gain is going to be gained at level 4. And it is sort of one that keeps on giving in the sense that when you acquire it at level 4, you also are able to use it again at levels 8, 12, 16, and 19. This feature is a retraining feature that is called Cantrip Versatility, and it is applied whenever you gain the ability score improvement feature, hence why it is usable at those levels previously mentioned. This feature essentially gives you the ability to take one of your currently known cantrips, which are under your spells listing here on your actions tab, and replace it with another cantrip from the Cleric's spell list. And even though your character has the ability to have extra spells available as part of their selection, unfortunately cantrips did not get any extra spells made available. So if I click on this list here, you will see that there are no cantrips. So you will have to go back to your main spellcasting table and then your spells table here to get the available cantrips that you have. There's one thing that I want to note about this, though, is that if you happen to have a cantrip, or multiple cantrips for that matter, that are provided by a feature or by some racial traits, you will not be able to replace those particular cantrips as they were not provided by your clerical class, therefore they don't fall under this cantrip versatility feature. Now that doesn't mean that you can't potentially change that out using the default rules that I will get into a little bit later in this video. And as I've stated earlier, you can execute this change again at levels 8, 12, 16, and 19. But I should note that this feature does not cover the process of changing any other feature option, nor does it cover the case of changing out your subclass. And changing out a cantrip is relatively easy. All you have to do is access your character's spell list, select a cantrip that you want to remove, so let's say Thaumaturgy, and let's add resistance. And that's it. Now, I've already recorded that, so some of you might have seen resistance earlier in here. Well, I just essentially swapped them, so please don't shoot me for that. And the last feature that you can get is called Blessed Strikes, and it is a replacement feature that you will gain at level 8. This feature will replace either the Divine Strike or the Potent Spellcasting feature, dependent entirely on the subclass that you have chosen, and it is one of the few cases where a subclass feature is being replaced by a standard base class feature. And what do I mean by that? Well, if you look at this particular class's class specialization, which is the life domain, you will see down here at the bottom Divine Strike, and in brackets the keyword life. Well, this skill gives you the ability to do an extra 1d8 of radiant damage once you acquire it at level 8. At levels 14, you also gain the ability to do up to 2d8 points of damage. Well, this skill here replaces this. But if you take a look at this other class specialization provided by Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, you will see that it has Potent Spellcasting, which really allows you to add your Wisdom modifier to the damage that you're dealing with any particular cantrip. Well, by technicality, it's actually not a class specialization feature that is being replaced. It just happens to be listed under the class specializations because of the differences of the domain. So those under the life domain have the life bracket listed after it, whereas those under other domains have their domain listed under the bracket. That's the only reason why it's in the class specialization. And the same goes for the Potent Spellcasting feature. But it's not something you should really have to deal with. But with this particular feature, you can now choose to do an additional 1d8 of radiant damage to your total damage when a cantrip hits a target, or if you've hit your target with a ranged or melee-based weapon, regardless of whether that weapon is magical or not. It can, however, only be done once per turn, meaning that if you've managed to connect with a second attack due to a reaction, or somehow had a bonus action that gave you another attack during a single round, you would not be able to add 1d8 radiant damage to either of those situations if you've already hit your target and done damage to that target and used Blessed Strikes as part of that particular attack. You would need to wait until you got to the next round before you could use it again. And I consider it more of a recharging of your Radiant pool per se. However, other than the once per turn limitation, and whether it's a weapon or spell type, or the fact that you have hit your target, there are no real limitations associated with this feature, which means you can literally use it every single turn, and it doesn't run out of uses. To set this up, you will definitely need to add this to your Actions tab. So let's go ahead and drag this into place and add it to the Cleric group. And there's not much we have to do here. It's already set up to do the damage. So as long as you have your target selected already in the combat tracker, all you have to do is click this and it will add the 1d8 radiant damage to the damage that you have just dealt to that particular character or creature. And what do I mean by that? Well, if I open up the combat tracker here, you can see that I have the Cleric as being the active character, if you will, during the combat round, and I have targeted the Succubus. If I now execute a melee-based attack on that Succubus, let's use this Warhammer, for example. That is a hit. I've now go ahead and do my damage. Now all I have to do is scroll down to here and click that. But you don't necessarily want to get rid of this, because next round, let's move down to the point where the Cleric comes around again. At this point, I now have the ability to use this again. That's what it means by the next turn. So you don't necessarily want to, quote unquote, get rid of this ability, and you can't even really set it up where it's a once per use and then it goes away till the next round, because this doesn't control this in any way, shape, or form. In addition to that, you only have 3 options here: is daily, rest, which means either a long or short rest respectively, or once, which means the equivalent of a potion, for example, or a scroll. So all it will have to come down to is you simply remembering that you've actually already used it, and then you don't get the option to use it again until your turn comes around again. Generally, that's not too hard to remember. Now, the last thing that I want to go over is around the default retraining abilities that are available for the Cleric and how you can actually use them. Because this class does have a retraining feature, even if that retraining feature only deals with cantrips, any other kind of retraining that you're going to be doing, such as skill proficiencies, feature options, if they're ones that are permanent choices, changing your subclass, or anything else along those lines, will fall to the default rules associated with Tasha's Cauldron of Everything and how that rule set handles those kinds of changes. However, it doesn't affect your ability to select a different range of spells each time that you rest, because of the way that a Cleric goes through and actually makes use of their ability to select spells through their deity. And as I've stated earlier, I've already recorded a video that goes ahead and explains these and have posted that in the description below. So I highly recommend you go and listen to that particular part of the video so that you understand how that works. In conclusion, it is nice to see that the Cleric class has added some additional spells the player can now use, as well as added a new option to the Channel Divinity feature, and provided a choice around the Blessed Strikes, Divine Strike, or Potent Spellcasting features, giving the player a bit more variety to work with. However, this does bring us to the end of this particular video. I want to thank you for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one. I wish to thank you for taking the time to watch this particular video. I hope you found it informative and useful to familiarizing yourself with Fantasy Grounds in general, and that you had fun in the process. If you found the video useful and you liked the content of the particular video, go ahead and click that like button to let me know. And if you have any questions specific to the topic covered by this particular video, or just have some comments in general, please feel free to post something in the comments section, and I will do my best to respond to any questions that are asked. Additionally, I do release content quite regularly, and it's generally specific to Fantasy Grounds or 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons at this time. So if you'd like to be notified when new videos come out, go ahead and subscribe and click the notification bell to ensure that notification is sent to you when I release a new video.